My name's Joel. We're going to be looking today at the second to last part of a series of messages we've been doing since the year began on the book of Acts, or at least one paragraph in the book of Acts. It's a description of the first church. And the way it comes to us is as a list of their various priorities and behaviors and qualities, characteristics that made them distinct, made them remarkable, in fact, made them revolutionary. So we've called the series Viva la Resurrection, to play to the theme of revolutionary community. That's what the church was when it began. And I want to look today at what's in verse 47, where it says that they had favor with all the people. Favor with all the people. And that whole issue of the relationship of the church with the wider community is what I want to touch on today. So if you're a Christian here, this will hopefully help you to understand how you, as a follower of Jesus, need to learn to be in a world that isn't committed to Jesus, being in a city that isn't committed to Jesus. How do we relate to the wider world? If you're here and you're not a Christian, or you're watching this on one of the other sites, and you're not a Christian, this, I hope, will still be really interesting to you, because you get to see what we really talk about as Christians in terms of how we want to relate in the real Brighton and Hove and Shoreham and beyond as we find it today. So that's the plan. We'll be starting in a moment with the reading from Acts chapter 2, verse 42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. So when you become a Christian, if you've become one, you'll know that the experience involves a certain kind of concern about your relationship to the world as you find it. If I follow Jesus, what does that mean in terms of whether people will like me anymore? Will they trust me anymore? Will I be able to hang out with the same people anymore? That was a huge question for me. I at the age of 16, got serious in my relationship with God, you could say. I kind of went all in and kind of pulled the stops out, took the brakes off, and said, I'm going for it. I want to follow Jesus. But I knew when I did that, I was kind of burning my bridges with the past in many ways, and potentially putting even some friendships on the line, which was a big deal. I remember at one stage, personally, just being so grieved with the loss of friendships that I felt. I remember one stage, some friends left my house after having effectively parted company and left me, after saying we don't want to be your friends anymore, and just on the floor in tears, just kind of so overcome with the sense of loss and almost a bit ashamed through it all. That's part of following Christ for many people, not necessarily for everybody. I suppose for many of us, we might hope for better things. What about if all my friends, or what about if all the city just decided that Christians were great and loved Christians, and Christianity was kind of in again, and it made it convenient for me to become one. And when you read a verse like this, it certainly makes you hope that such a thing could happen. It says that they had favor from all the people. And maybe we would start thinking, well, this is supposed to be a description of the church at its best. And maybe when the church is really at its best, everyone loves the church. And so that's what we should hope for. I'm afraid it's not quite like that. This is a description of the church at a certain point in its story. It's a snapshot. And actually, as a snapshot, it's descriptive more than it is prescriptive, if you know what I mean. What I'm saying is, you read the rest of the book of Acts and you'll notice that this isn't the only way that Christians were received by the wider world. Within a couple of pages, we've got the senior leaders of the Christian movement being arrested and beaten. We've got them being put in prison. We've got one of the vocal spokesmen for Christianity, Stephen, being stoned to death publicly, and the leaders giving approval. We've got James, one of the apostles, being beheaded. We've got Peter being put in prison. There's a whole load of different ways in which they did not enjoy favor with all the people. And then you get the peculiar things, like it's a fascinating verse in chapter 5 where it says in verse 13, none of the rest dared join them, but the people held them in high esteem. I've always found that verse fascinating. That's an unusual snapshot right there. So the wider community in the city respected the Christians at this stage, but didn't want to join them. They're like, you guys, okay, we're cool. We respect you, but we're not coming because your God freaks us out. It was like that. There was a sense of awe and reverence. And I mean, you have to read the chapter to know why they felt like that. There's a story behind it. But it meant that the whole community felt the ripple effect of, wow, these Christians, they are serious. There's something extraordinary about them. And we're not to trifle with them or with their God. And that can happen. So the reality is that the relationship between the church and the wider community tends to go up and down. It's a roller coaster ride. It's not consistent in the book of Acts. In fact, not only does it fluctuate between the chapters, it can sometimes fluctuate within the chapters. You've got stories like Paul when he's in Malta, chapter 28 of Acts, the last chapter, which is just a freaky chapter. It's just fun. The whole book's freaky, but chapter 28 is kind of one of the top ones. He gets to Malta by shipwreck, and they're just on the beach, kind of trying to survive. And like you would, they're putting wood together to make a fire, and he's pulling some wood out of the shrubbery, and he finds a snake bites him. And it looks to the natives as though Paul has been cursed, and they start saying, oh, he must have done something bad, because that's their idea of just desserts. He got bitten by a snake. He must be a bad guy. He's a wrong 'un. He got bitten, so he's a baddie. And they start to beware of him. And then they notice he's not swelling and he's not keeling over and dying. He's fine. And they know that's a bad snake that bit Paul, but he's fine. So they, oh wow, he's got spiritual power. And actually, he did have spirit. God was keeping him safe. But they go from within a few minutes, I guess, seeing Paul as a demon to seeing him as a god. They start worshiping him. Right halfway through the book of Acts, get to Paul and Barnabas in Lystra, same kind of story. They start worshiping them as gods because they do a healing of a lame man. A few pages or a few sentences later, they're stoning them and leaving them for dead. The world is kind of hard to predict in the way it relates to the church. And if we're going to follow Jesus, need to learn to live a bit with that. Need to accept that there's going to be some changes in our relationship, and need to not make it into some kind of, I guess, unhelpful prescription that we ought always to be flavor of the month. Not going to happen realistically. Not. It might happen for a month, but you will not be flavor the next month, probably. And if you're a parent, you know about this, okay? So, parenting is kind of the same. I know what it's like to go in the same day or the same hour, minute even, from being, you're the best dad in the world, to being El Diablo, because I insist on the Xbox being turned off, or I didn't bring back from the shops the thing they wanted, or I did bring them back, but they were the wrong kind. And it just goes like that in some communities, some societies, and frankly, people generally are like that. And so we mustn't be too freaked out. We need to learn how to live with that as the church, and yet in all of it, be faithful to our Master. And that's what I want to look at in the time we have today. And the way we're going to do this, I hope, is by using the wisdom that we get from Jesus' friend Peter, who at this stage is actually the key leader in the church. And later on, he writes a couple of letters that found their way into the New Testament. And so we're going to use his first letter, which is particularly to do with the issue of how Christians should relate to the wider world. And we'll pick out a few key lessons from it. So first of all, verse 17b, or at the end of verse 17, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile, he says to the Christians. Conduct yourselves with fear through the time of your exile. He's not talking about fear of people. You'll talk about that later. He's talking about the fear of God. But he says, through the time of your exile, which is a clue right there. He talks to Christians as exiles. He talks to them as people who don't belong in this present age. Your exiles. He's going to come up later. Let's keep going. Verse 4 of chapter 2. As you come to him, speaking of Jesus, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. And that's a revealing verse right there. He's saying, look, there's been this massive wedge driven into history. Jesus Christ is the one rejected by mankind. If you disagree with me, just look at the cross. That's a fairly clear statement of what humanity decided to do when God showed up in the flesh. That's what we did. We crucified God. And Peter's saying, you're the ones that belong to the rejected one. That's who you are. So if you belong to Christ, you belong to the one who will be rejected, who has been rejected by men. But in the sight of God, precious, chosen, the one who God chooses happily. Men might despise Jesus, might strip him naked and beat him and pull his beard out and put nails through his hands and feet and leave him to die horribly. God says, I delight in him. Could you get a more radical difference? And Peter's saying, just remember how different we are from the world then. See, I want to talk about, this is the first point that we need to make from Peter's letter here. He wants us to accept the difference. There's many parts to this. I mean, in fact, we should go on to verse 11, where he says, Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. There's that word again, those kinds of words, sojourners and exiles, like pilgrims, people passing through, people who know that they don't quite belong. You kind of feel at home in the world, but then you don't. If you're a Christian, you know that feeling. Frankly, if you travel anywhere, you tend to know it. Some of you who are people from other countries in England, you know that from a very vivid sense. I guess many of you might be here as students or people who are working in the UK before you move back to another country again, or maybe you're here to stay, but you're aware often of how different this is to where you grew up or where you're from. You feel sometimes like that exile, that sojourner, that pilgrim. I don't quite belong in this passing age. I was in Kenya for a while when I was younger. I lived there for a short time and had the very educating experience of living in a particularly Kenyan part of Nairobi. The contacts I had who were English said, well, we don't want you to live with us. And for all kinds of reasons, I'm sure. But they said, we want you to have want you to actually get to know Kenya and live with Kenyans. So I said, you're going to live in this part of the city. And I was the only white guy for miles around. Every day I got on the same bus that went back from the city centre right out to where I lived, right out on the edge of the city. And I would just feel all the time so much a stranger. It was never unpleasant. People were nice, but it felt like a kind of, nevertheless, exile experience. This feels so different than everything I knew about life up till then. And for a Christian, that's kind of part of the journey for us, is the sense of, I kind of sort of feel at home, but sort of don't. I've got to be real. I've got to accept the difference that has already been made in my life. Doesn't mean that we have permission to disengage. I mean, Peter's going to say that in chapter 2, verse 12. He says, keep your conduct among the Gentiles. That's the code word he uses for those who don't know Jesus in this verse. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Peter wants us to engage. He's not saying, well, look, you're Christians, you're holy, the world isn't holy, the world's big, bad, dangerous, ugly, sinful, wicked, so come away to church. Let's all live in the church. Let's bolt the doors. Let's lock it up. Let's just seal ourselves away. Let's live in a Christian ghetto. Let's have just Christian stuff, just Christian clothes, Christian music, Christian radio, Christian buttons, Christian everything. and just make sure that we're nice and safe from the big, bad, nasty, old, ugly, horrible world out there. Brighton, Brighton's wicked and sinful, and so is Amsterdam, and so is Berlin, and so keep away. Come and live in a kind of sinister cult-like existence in the woods somewhere, because that's the only way to be faithful and monastic. And that may be even quite tempting if we realize how truly the world is a bad place. And Jesus has made us different, and we think, well, I don't feel at home here, so let's just circle the wagons and stick to ourselves. But Peter's just not going there, and he won't let us. He says, let your conduct be honorable so they can see it. They need to see you. You need to rub shoulders. You need to be in the world. Jesus prayed for his disciples. So I'm not praying that they will come out of the world. I want them to be in the world. Jesus wants us in the world because he loves the world, because he loves the city. He wants our conduct to be shown. He wants us to be rubbed right in to the world, like salt right into society. That's the way it works in the New Testament. So we're not permitted to disengage, but nevertheless, we need to be wise and discerning about the difference that's been made in our lives. We're brand new people. See, if you follow Jesus, and some of you've become Christians recently, you've got to hear me on this. I want you to listen to this. You need to learn how to discern the times, discern the age you're in, discern the culture. You need to learn to put the filters on. Not everything in the world is evil. God made the world. It's beautiful. God made it. So many things that we can just enjoy on a Sunday afternoon in sunny Brighton. God gave us so many gifts to enjoy. But friends, not everything in the world is good either. Some of it you can redeem, you can turn it around, make it good. Some of it you just can't. You just can't. You just got to not touch it. You got to not receive it, not take it on. I know this. Some of you as Christians, you've been way too naive about how many of the world's ideas, assumptions, beliefs, ways of thinking, you're just prepared to suck in without any criticism, without any questioning, without any wisdom. And that's no way to live. That's no way to follow Christ. A Christ follower will keep questioning everything. You will question everything through the lens of this book, through the grid of the gospel. You'll keep putting it through that treatment. Does this marry up with Christ? Does it? Is this fitting with Christ? These opinions I'm getting from this chat show, from this question time broadcast, from this piece of social media, from this tweet, from that entry on Facebook, from this blog post, from this episode of Breaking Bad or West Wing or whatever, from this song, from this video. There are messages all the time coming out. There are opinions and ideas and presuppositions. They're just pumping at you from every angle. And if you're not wise, you'll just drink it in, and use those ideas to question what this says instead of the other way around. And listen, Jesus said, if you build your life that way, you're like a guy building his house on sand. You're headed for disaster. Build your life on rock. Build your life on wisdom. Understand the difference. At least do that. Wake up to the reality of the difference. I have a nephew who has a fairly serious nut allergy. And to the point where it's ruined a few Christmases where family members, wide family get-togethers haven't been sufficiently vigilant about what goes into the Christmas cake or whatever. And he's had to get rushed to hospital. It's ruined holidays. It's like this, we've done it again. And I mean, it's just so obvious. It's just little silly things. When someone's life might depend on it, you start to wise up. When the stakes get high, you start thinking, you look carefully at the labels, you look at the ingredients, think, is this right? Should I be taking this in? This could affect my life, and maybe it could affect my family, it could affect my children. I want to watch for what we're taking in. I'm not saying you can't watch stuff, or that's the problem that Christians often, you go from what I'm saying and say, right, we will ban everything. No, I just said a minute ago, no, these things can be good, these things can be redeemed. You can watch episodes, you can enjoy anything, podcast, music. By God's grace, enjoy it all, but filter it. Look at it. Ask questions of it. Don't be foolish. Be real. Just accept the fact God's made you different now. You belong to a different age. You're an exile here. belong to the future, my friend. You don't belong to the past. So we've got to accept the difference. And then secondly, we've got to expect trouble. So this is the darkest part, I suppose. We've got to expect some trouble, at least. We're wise to expect some trouble. We don't cause it, we don't pick fights, but we expect them. That's right there in a few of the places that Peter talks. You can go to chapter 4 and verses 3 to 4. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they're surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery and they malign you. You might think, yeah, that's kind of ancient stuff. That's kind of weird. I haven't been invited to many orgies lately, but you know the principle. You know the principle. Surely if you follow Jesus, surely you've known this. It's a tough part of following Christ. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to this. I'm going to do that instead. What? Why wouldn't you? And you can end up being maligned. It's very real. And then you get down to verse 12. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice, insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or a thief, or an evildoer, or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. So he's telling us to expect trouble. Be real. That will occasionally come. We shouldn't go looking for it, but don't be freaked out and shocked as it comes. What's going on when we encounter antagonism of all kinds? Whether it's literal physical threats. I mean, there are people in this church who I know, citizens of another country. I'm thinking of right now one family where they would be in serious physical danger if they went back to their own country. And they really want to, because they love their country. They want to tell people about Jesus. They do a lot of it by online means at the moment. That's real. We're not talking about history. We're talking about today. There's more martyrs on planet Earth today than there ever have been before. And we live in a global world. People in Brighton, in threats for their life. But it will go right through the spectrum to just the teasing at a coffee break. You think, it's not even nasty, it's jocular. They're kind of being affectionate, but it can get under your skin. And then there's the medium stuff where it's actually quite negative, where it's people who do want to diss you, or people who want to break friendships, or people in your family, and you feel the pain of it, even the heartbreak of it, sometimes for a long time. Yeah, it's going to happen, Peter. It'll be real. Wake up. This is part of the challenge of following our master. And in all of it, be sure that you're looking for the right person's approval. See, what will happen in all this, it will check our need for society's approval. We need that, don't we? Man, we need it. I want people to approve of me so much. I want it to be that everyone I meet, it likes me. I want them to approve of me. It's just a fleshly desire, a lust that I guess most of us have. And Peter's saying, just kill that. Don't let that control you. That desire, that need for approval. That's why he says crazy things like at the end of chapter 3, verse 6, he says, do not fear anything frightening. It's a really weird sentence, isn't it? Do not fear anything frightening. So what, you want us to fear things that aren't? Is that the logic? No, he's saying, look, the reality is this is a world that's going to frighten you, or try to. And he said, you don't have to. You just don't live there. That's not your story. You don't have to fear even frightening things, even the fear of disapproval, the fear of shame, the fear of colleagues, of family members, neighbors, friends turning against you, the world, social media. Don't fear it, Peter says. You don't have to live there. In verse 14 of chapter 3, we get him saying, even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. How does he get to be so blasé? Where's this coming from? Is it just bravado? Is he just cocky? No, we know Peter's story. We know that's not true. We know he turned into a coward at the most trying point of his life. He blew it badly. So he's not being cavalier. He's not showing off. He's found something. He's found something out. He's found real resources to cope with the things that the world throws at him. He's come through the pain and he understands, I don't have to be afraid. Where has he found these things? In his Savior. He's found them in Jesus. He's found in Jesus the complete and utter approval of the only person whose approval matters. That's Christianity, right? That's what it is. Maybe you've come today thinking you know what Christianity is. You think you know what you're going to get told. You're going to get stop taking drugs, stop doing bad things with the other sex, and say your prayers, read your Bible, and come to church. And then God might like you. That's the impression that we generally get. You must understand that's a horrible, disgraceful disguise for something that's not even Christianity. It's just false religion. The message that God has sent his Son into the world to proclaim is that because actually we would never be able to win God's approval by our good works. None of us could come close. God himself, he became human, carried our shame, our guilt, our wrongdoing on himself. He lived the life we should have lived, and he died the death we should have died. There was an exchange that took place on the cross. He took on the cross the burden of our shame, all of God's righteous disapproval. God should disapprove of you and me. He should, because of the things we've said, the things we've done, the things we've thought. We don't even have to say the things that God sees. He knows all about you. And of course he's going to disapprove. But you don't know the kind of God he is. The kind of God he is, the God who says, well, I'll take it on then. I'll take the blame. I'll take the crisis, the cost, the penalty. I'll come under it myself. I'll bear it. I'll hang naked for you. That's what he did. That's Christianity. That's Christianity. God giving himself for you. So that you, with all of your past, with all of your mistakes, with all the stuff you're thinking of maybe right now, thinking, but what I've done is so bad. The things even the things that have happened to you that make you feel dirty, things you think, but you don't know what a mess I am, what a mess I've made. Yes, you, maybe the person next to me, but not me. No, you. Yeah, but I was such a mess. I am such a mess. Jesus became a mess on the cross. The Bible says they beat him so bad you couldn't even recognize him. You want to talk about mess? Jesus took the mess. Jesus received the blame so you could be forgiven. So you could be received. So God the Father could willingly take you to his embrace and say, you're my child now. No one is going to accuse you ever again. Yeah, but I'll do bad things. Yeah, I know. Jesus has taken the blame for the bad things. Yeah, but I'll make mistakes. Yeah, I know. Jesus took the blame for the mistakes. You've got my approval from now on. Peter has learned that. He's got it. He knows he can't lose. He can't lose. And so it empowers him, even in the face of disapproval, to say, in the end, I'm not seeking the world's approval. He's not pretending. It is painful. When people are harsh, when the world is difficult, when you feel you stand like a sore thumb, I'm not pretending that's easy. I said earlier, I've been through tears on that. But friends, he carries even those sorrows. And you find a God who invites you into a relationship, a healing relationship, where you ultimately, you can't lose with him. This is massive. This is what makes the huge difference for us. And I want to finish by looking at the third thing, which is not just that we should accept the difference or that we should expect difficulty, but that we should also reflect our master. And that's right through this letter that Peter wrote, that they are called, as you are if you're a Christian, to reflect your master. Let's look at where he says it most strongly in chapter 2, verses 19 onwards. He says this, "For this is a gracious thing, when mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth." So Peter's wanting a community of Christ reflectors, people who remind him of Jesus. I want this to be your ways, and let this be in you. You're called to his example. Don't just see him as someone who's a nice example generally, but no, follow his example. Follow the way he goes. And the community that does that changes the world. Changes the world. Sometimes you can't notice it happening. It's so subtle. The world is full of revolutionaries who want to change the world this afternoon, want to change the world by retweeting things or signing petitions or turning up at marches. The real world changers are often the ones no one notices them doing it. It's just the constant commitment to following Christ in the face of the world and sometimes right in the dark. So let's just look at the key ways that this works out. First of all, just bare integrity. Sheer integrity. Peter's saying, live such lives in front of people that they look at you and they praise God, they glorify God on the day of his visitation. You know, it's possible to have people say, I don't agree with Christianity, but I cannot despise it because of the people that I meet. The people that I've seen, the Christians I've seen, they've proved to me that this thing must be real. I can't despise it. That will happen sometimes. There was a group of people in France in the 16th century onwards called the Huguenots. They were Protestants who were victimized, persecuted, marginalized, once or twice massacred in thousands across France. They had a horrendous track record of persecution. But they carried on faithful to Jesus in spite of it. And one of the phrases, the slogans that became part of the French culture for at least a while was, as honest as a Huguenot. As honest as a Huguenot. The French, although they generally despised them, they couldn't doubt their honesty. They loved their integrity. They noticed it. They witnessed it. So everything they do, they do well. They do what they say they're going to do. They do their job well. They work hard. They turn up on time. They finish on time. They get things done to the deadline. Just doing that as a Christian, if that's your track record, following Jesus at the office or with your degree or whatever it is that you're doing, you're shining brightly, my friend. You are. You might not be out there changing the world. I tell you, you are. You are. That's where it counts, right there. Wouldn't it be amazing if people said that about Brighton? Those people in Brighton, they're honest as Christians. The Christians are the honest ones. I doubt that's the language these days. I hope it would be one day. But that's where we win the battle, often in just the ordinary integrity. I love the fact that once or twice you've had people say, employers in this city say to us, have you got any more guys, any more people who we could employ? We've had that said to us because they've noticed something about them. It's beautiful. And that's surely one of the most pleasing things to God. Certainly pleases me as a pastor. Secondly, really quickly, not just in our integrity, but in our going out of our way to bless our city, to show mercy, to show love. And when I say bless, I mean it in the acrostic sense. You may have heard us talk about this. If you're part of this church, you will have definitely. We begin with prayer, we listen, we eat, we serve, we share our story. We begin with prayer for people. We listen to people. We eat with people. We serve people. We share our story with people. We do the practical. We get into lives and we show mercy. We show kindness to people. Let me ask you, if you're a part of CCK, if this is your church, let me ask you, who are you blessing today? Who are you blessing today? Well, I haven't done any of those things. I haven't listened to anyone. I haven't eaten with anyone that's not a Christian. I'm not doing those things. Well, pray for them. That's good. That's good. That passes. That's fine. That's fine. That's not a cop-out. Pray for the people that God's called you to bless. Start listening. Look for opportunities. Keep in the habit. Keep in the cycle of it. This is how we are to conduct ourselves before the world, so that even for us, maybe people will see the grace of God on us. And maybe there will be a kind of favor as they see evidence of God on us. And then thirdly and finally, well, Peter says, let's let Peter describe this last one. So I've talked about integrity, I've talked about blessing people. Verse 23 of chapter 2, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. This is the one I find the hardest. I think I can do all right at number 1 and number 2. Integrity sometimes, blessing sometimes. Not reviling when I've been reviled. Wow, that tests me. But this is right here. This is what Peter calls us to. What do we mean by reviling? We mean any kind of persecution, any kind of attack, verbal, physical, anything like that. How did Jesus respond? How did Jesus react? Well, he didn't. He didn't revile in return. And if any man had the right to in history, it was him. But he never did. This is huge. Have you ever been reviled? Ever been sworn at, cursed at, just on the street, maybe just road rage, just anything, and just gets under your skin. You want a piece of that person. You want somehow you play the tape in your head of the conversation you would have. It goes on, and we feel that. I feel that just in ordinary life, let alone persecution from the wider city. I'm not good at this, friends. This isn't me, but Peter's saying this is what we're called to, guys. This is going to be us. This is how we're going to play it. This is going to be us, okay? We're going to be like Jesus. How can I become like Jesus in this extraordinary way? Let me encourage you. See, this word here, revile, when Jesus was reviled, he didn't revile in return. It gets used in the Greek version of the Old Testament where it describes Moses. You have to go back in the Old Testament to where he was eventually fed up with the people he was called to lead. He's called to lead this community of slaves, refugees out of Egypt into the promised land. And they were awful. 2 million grumbling, whining people. And they put him through it for years. He did so well. He was so meek. The Bible says the meekest man on planet Earth. He was so patient, so gracious, so humble. He never snapped after years of this. And then finally one day he just snapped. Finally one day he just got angry. And God said to him, Moses, I would have let you lead them into the land, but you can't now. And if you're Moses, you're like, but I did so well up till then. Why it's so hard? It's so hard to be. And God's like, yeah, it is. It is. It's what I've been putting up with from creation. It's hard, isn't it, Moses? But I'm going to send someone into the world one day who is just like me. I'm going to produce a human being who, when reviled, never reviles in return. And that was true of Jesus. He was taken like a lamb to be slain. He never spoke a word. Never spoke a word. All the opportunity he had just to react, to get angry. His disciples did. Peter, the guy who wrote this letter, he turns up with a sword, slices someone's ear off. Jesus says, put your sword away. Put it away. Takes the guy's ear, sticks it back on. He's just like, it's just, what is this? Who are you? How do you do this in this world, this dark world? How do you live like that? He says he continued to entrust himself to him who judges justly. That's how he did it. I'm trusting my Father. I know my Father. I know him too well. I don't have to fight for myself. I could never know God like that. How do you know God like that? Well, here's one way in. You think, well, only heroes get to know God like that. No, Peter did. Peter got to know God like that. Here's the thing, though. Peter knew in the end that Jesus was the one who took it for him. See, if we all try to be heroes now, we're going to blow it. Moses was better than anyone in this city, the meekest man who ever walked the earth except for Jesus. If Moses blew it, I'm going to blow it. And so are you. We rest not on ourselves, but on a Savior who will never blow it. Never blow it. He will never lose his temper. He will never react in that fleshly, selfish way. He never has done, he never will. And friends, it means that in your life you can be confident of his goodness, of his faithfulness. It will help you to lean on him. You'll find that your love for people will grow as your confidence in his love for you grows. That's the key. That's how we really change. Let me just pray, and then we're going to worship together. Father, we thank you again for your Son. Thank you for the bread and the wine that we come to now, the table. We thank you for this gift that reminds us of him, all that he's done. This gift of food and drink that we feed on as we receive Christ into our bodies, into our lives, into our futures. We want to do it with faith. We pray, be with us now and help us to engage with you in Jesus' name. Amen.